Hey everyone, what is going on? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian, and today we have another really exciting video. This year's George T. Stagg, the 2022 138.7 proof. Now, I am not one of those people who get all the samples from Buffalo Trace, and honestly, I've never had a full year's vertical tasting of all of the products. And as much as I tried to get my hands on a couple of them to be able to try here for the channel, today, all we're talking about is this year's release of George T. Stagg. And I'm not so mad about it because I'm a big fan of George T. Stagg. There are some people who are head over heels over George T. Stagg. And I'm not exactly one of those guys. As you might be familiar on the channel, it isn't really a distillery that I'm constantly visiting in my everyday pours. However, the 2014 George T. Stagg, which I only have this much left of that will kind of smell, taste, compare to videos. This is one of my favorite bottles of all time. And I've had some past years George T. Stagg releases as well. And so we're going to kind of talk about where it stands up. 2020 was the last year that this one came out. It did not come out in the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection last year. And so it is back this year in the collection, and the distillation was in spring of 2007. Of all of the barrels in the antique collection, actually had the highest evaporation loss at 75%. 15 years, 5 months old, and again, coming in at 138.7 proof, which happens to be the highest proof since 2016. So what I'm hoping to do, I've let this sit open a little bit. We're gonna nose it, we're gonna taste it, and we're gonna compare quickly to some of the last couple of releases just to kind of get a feel for where it's at. The usual suspects are here on the nose. Big brown sugar notes, some coffee notes, chocolate notes, underlying with oak there. It has this kind of crisp green apple, red apple like note there that honestly comes out a little bit more the longer you let it sit open. But a very classic, iconic Buffalo Trace note in my mind, and definitely something I've noticed recently on the Staggs. Beyond that though, it gets a little interesting. It's not quite funky, musty, dusty-esque like some of the older ones are. However, it's got some funk to it. It's got some cognac-like notes, some rum finish-like notes in there. Definitely a boozy, leaning nose that almost makes me think, kind of summing it all up as like a barrel-aged Manhattan. You get kind of the fruit notes there and a lot of nice oak presence as well, with kind of the alcohol backburn, but not at all kicking the way I thought it might at 138.7 proof. No burn on this nose, just lots of big sweetness. And the thing that I like about the nose here, even though it has some of the fruit notes, even though I made that kind of Manhattan reference, it's not as cherry forward as the 2018 for sure, and to a lesser extent the 2020 as well. I think it had a good amount of fruit on the nose as well, but it doesn't have that here. There is still some fruitiness. It's not the dominant notes. So the dominant notes here would again be a little bit of the vanilla, the brown sugar, the oak, really nice stewed, boozy notes there. Really inviting nose, very pillowy in texture. It smells like it's going to be very saturated, very thick, but without all that heat, which is helpful because the 2020 release on the palate mainly, I thought that it leaned a little too hot for what it was. And that was only 130.4 proof. But I thought it leaned a little hot, a little cinnamon forward. The baking spices were a little too pronounced. So I'm hoping to see if we back down a little bit here. Let's go ahead and go in on the palate. This is luscious, viscous, coating immediately. The oak is not shy here. It's got dark fruit notes underlying, like date, prune, fig, or raisin, kind of layered underneath, which to me is a little bit unusual. Usually I'm used to the pops of the cherry or the apple more. You have this sticky almost never ending sweet oakiness to it. It's a warm oakiness. It's slightly funky. It's not quite tannic, but it's not fresh wood. It lingers for a long time. I'm sitting here a minute later, and that oakiness definitely punches through more on the finish and lingers for a long time. If you're not one for really oaky, mature pours, this might not necessarily be the preferred year for you. But man, what a complex, oaky, pronounced linger. And in the long linger, so now we're at a minute and a half from my last trying it, you get more of that chocolate note. You get more of the coffee, kind of traditionally, maybe a little bit more forward in other Staggs. Otherwise, big cola notes, big leather oak notes swing in here. Let's kind of talk briefly about some other pours. The 2020 that I mentioned earlier is definitely one that I would say was one of the ones I preferred the most since my favorite being of recent years, the 2014. And that is because it brought back a lot more oak forward presence. However, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it did have a lot of baking spice and kind of a cinnamon note that I find in a lot of Buffalo Trace products, honestly, and some youthful pours in the Buffalo Trace line as well. And it kind of cuts through there, and it sort of breaks up the enjoyment for me. Let's go back to the 2018. 2018, again, I thought was cherry forward. It was very enjoyable, very sweet, nice balance of fruit with its natural sweetness that it has and a little bit of the oak presence. But if you compare it to a couple other years, the viscosity is a little bit shy, which going into 2019, I think was its biggest downfall. The flavors were enjoyable for sure, but I felt like it reached a little bit more tannic in nature to the oakiness. I don't know if it's because it was lower in proof, but it definitely gave that off a little bit more. And the thing that was most noticeable to me was it's lacking in the viscousness. It was lacking in that body that I think is traditional of some of the very older, well-known, well-enjoyed George T. Staggs. 2017 is one that I personally put right below the 2018, but I know a lot of people really liked it. This does not have quite the brown sugar caramel vanilla pocket the 2017 does. It has more cola-like notes than it has the caramel vanilla play that the 2017 had. But there is a kind of off note about the 2017. I can't quite place it. And there's a unique note also in this 2022. So I think people who enjoyed the 2017 will also probably enjoy several components of the 2022. And if you like oak, all the more enjoyable. The longer I let it sit in the glass, the more I have to nose, because it has this perfumed, complex, musty oak that continues to grow in the glass. And honestly, it's really similar to the 2014. Go ahead and get a quick taste of the 2014. It's hard to describe the oakiness in the 2014. It's so enjoyable. It's complex. It seems slightly fresh, but it is, I just don't know how to describe it. And to be completely truthful, while it does have the kind of boozy, fruitier notes in here as well, I would say that the oak that's here in the 2022 is as close to the funkier, musty oak notes that I've had in the 2014 than anything that we've had here in between. The longer it sits open, the more caramel comes in. And to be completely honest with you, we're coming off of Thanksgiving, and so I remember a tasting I did with some of my staff at the roastery. I brought out 89, 8101 wild turkey. And when we were talking, there was definitely that salted caramel note. You've heard me talk about it probably on the channel before. It's mainly with Dusties. But man, that musty, funky caramel note is so prominent here on the nose. And it continues on. The heat is nowhere near what you would think at 138.7 proof. It reminds me of Coy Hill a little bit in that regard, but even Coy Hill drinks hotter than this. Even King of Kentucky drinks hotter than this. But I have had lower proof pours that drink hotter than this as well. This reminds me of what I love about that 2014 that came in at 138.1 proof, and some of the older bottles as well. High proof that just don't taste it. You get all of the saturated flavor. It's like a barrel pick condensed down into saturated form and put into a glass. To me, this, and especially continuing to nose it, is about as good as bourbon gets. Guys, I know this is not an easy bottle to come by, so I know this review isn't that helpful, but I wanted to track this down because I was looking forward to seeing how this compared to past releases. And ever since 2014, as the secondary prices get higher and higher, that bottle becomes more unattainable. And so I always look forward to seeing, does the newer George T. Stagg release have what it takes to replace that in my mind? And I am happy to say I would be looking for one of these in the release lotteries coming up this year for sure. I'm sorry I can't compare it to the William LaRue Weller or any of the other ones in the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection for this year, but I'm at least glad that we got a chance to try this. If you get a chance to try this year's George T. Stagg, let me know down in the comments below. Let me know what you've thought about it. Let me know what you think about past years. If you've not tried this one, that's okay. Let me know what your favorite George T. Stagg year has been that you've been able to try. If you've not tried Stagg, but you've tried some of the other antique collection, let me know what some of your favorite bottles have been down below. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again for tuning in once again to another video. I hope that I'm continuing to bring content that you all are interested in hearing about. So let me know down below what you want to hear me talk about next. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you all later.